In the world of leadership, people are fascinated by different forms of intelligence, IQ being the most obvious one. But
CEO of the 8 Mile Consulting Group, David Neal, served 14 years as military officer in the Australian Defence Force, which included tours to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Leaving his military career behind, he started to further develop and challenge his own thoughts on leadership.
Today, he is challenging many myths and beliefs on the topic, making him among the world's top voices on the subject.
you're talking to a team that has drunk the Kool-Aid on servant leadership. Let me make it absolutely explicitly clear from the beginning. But
his specialist knowledge in raising, training, and sustaining teams now sees him serving everyone from Fortune 500 companies to the Australian prison system.
But his curiosity has also seen him explore the dark tetrad of psychopathy and the role such traits play in leadership. As a thought leader, David wants you to think twice about what you know about leadership, something he is encouraging you to do today.
On this episode of People with a Passion.
Dave, what's the greatest myth that you think people have around leadership?
I think maybe one of the biggest mistakes people make, anchored on a myth, is that it gets better as you go up the hierarchy. I think you will find that the vast majority of people who have moved their way up the competency hierarchy find themselves increasingly lonely.
Mm-hmm.
They might be surrounded by more people, but their weight of responsibility actually feels very isolating. The best way I can liken it is, imagine standing in the middle of a stadium with 50,000 people around you. And some people might say, oh, well, you're not alone at all. And it's like, you feel pretty lonely out there. There's a lot of judgment, a lot of criticism, a lot of critique, and a lot of should-haves. You should have done this, you could have done this, and why didn't you do this? And there's a lot of judgment. I think the higher you go up, the more increasingly true that becomes. And I meet a lot of very lonely CEOs, and they don't really have anyone to talk to. So that would probably be one of the biggest myths, I think, of leadership, is that the corner offices and the Chesterfield couch is where it ends. And it's like, not necessarily. A little bit more to it.
So that old adage that, can be lonely at the top.
It's very lonely at the top. And normally what I'd say, and I'm not trying to be too critical coming out of the gates, normally the people I hear that from are people who've never led a team. Or they've led a very small team with very minimal complexity. I have a theory about this topic, and if you break an organization down into its three fundamental or constituent parts, you would say that at the top you have the strategic level, at the middle you have the operational level, and at the bottom you have the tactical level. All right, so tactical, often dealing with the here and now. Operational, trying to forecast, but is crushed between the ideals of strategy and the practicalities of tactical. And then at the top, you're trying to shoot for the horizon, and you're trying to play with longer temporal or time pathways. Well, what do you make of that? Well, if I was to grab a tactical leader and I was to give him a set of fundamental rules they could abide by, it'll get them out of 80% of problems. There'll be a couple of curveballs in there, but generally speaking, a set of protocols will let them run the game through, and they'll come out on top most of the time. When you go to the operational level, it's less about rules and more about trade-offs. At that point, you're going, I can zig or zag, but if I go for a long-term play here, it's at the expense of the short-term, or if I go for short-term, it's at the expense of the long-term, or if I invest in education, well, that's going to affect the bottom line today, and et cetera, et cetera. But then when you get to the strategic level, it's less about trade-offs, less about protocols, and it's more about contradictions. And I've got this idea that there's paradoxes and contradictions as you go right up the top. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So when I was in the military, we worked for a general by the name of General Morrison, and he coined a very now popularized and famous quote saying, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And many of us have used it. It's become almost everyday language now. Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's speaking to the importance of one percenters, the little things, the power of precedent. It's talking about the little things that make the big things in terms of culture. And that's a fair argument. It's a perfectly reasonable argument. But if I was to say pick your battles, also a very famous phrase, probably more famous, so much so that I wouldn't even know who to coin it to.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, well, what is it? Is it pick your battles, i.e., this is not the hill I need to die on. This is not the right time and place. You know, I need favor with this person in order to get something more important over the line, and I'm going to favor the relationship over the outcome. Well, it's either the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. I'm going to fix it here and now, or I'm not. But both are perfectly reasonable claims. Both are perfectly contextual to leadership. But what is it? If I was to go, you need to lead from the front, get on the tools, be in the trenches, show yourself, lead the charge, first in, last out. Fair enough. But then I could also say, lead from the back.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get dragged into the weeds. See the bigger picture. Don't get caught in the minutiae. Don't micromanage. Well, what is it? I can't be at the front and can't be at the back at the same time. I could also go, you know, leaders put their mask on first. You know, get yourself squared. Get your own garden in order before you critique the neighbor. It's on the back of my shirt right now. It says leadership is not about you.
Yeah.
But what is it? Is it about do I put the mask on the person's head, or do I not put the mask on the person's head? Like people think these are very wishy-washy conceptual things, but when you boil them down to their rawest element, now you're playing around with choices, decisions, discernments. You know, you actually have to choose to do this or this. It actually becomes binary territory in some cases. And I think that is one, like to answer your question about one of the biggest myths. I think it's so lonely at the top because they're playing around with these paradoxical contradictions that other people don't yet have their heads wrapped around. And so when they see someone apply the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, when they feel that you should have been picking your battles, well, then the person looks like an idiot that they don't know what they're doing, but maybe they zigged instead of zagged. And maybe there was method behind the madness, and maybe there are bigger things at play that haven't yet been pretext.
But aren't they things that are only seen necessarily in hindsight, that at the time you make a decision?
I mean, that's like leadership, the curse of leadership.
Yeah.
You know, when the team's doing good, the team's doing good. But when it goes bad, it was the leader's fault.
Yeah.
And normally that's with the benefit of 2020 hindsight. And it's like,
See that
how
in sport.
convenient. Yeah.
In sport all the time, right?
Yeah.
Kill
Yeah,
the coach when the
what you
team's not
should have
doing
done
well.
is this.
Yeah.
I used to get it when I came back from combat patrols. You know, I'd come back and you might have been out there for 48 hours, 72 hours straight with an incredible amount of complexity and chaos, and you know that broader poetic concept of the fog of war. Well, you didn't have a lot of context a lot of the time. A bomb sounds like a bomb much of the time. It's like, what type of bomb? Where did it come from? Was it ours? Was it theirs? It's chaos. It's just chaos on a battlefield, and you're trying to be the source of order through the chaos. Fair enough. But then you get back from a patrol and someone would go, what you should have done is this. It's not very helpful right now. Look, it's one thing to do an after action review and genuinely go back and go, what could we have done better? It's another thing to just be nitpicking from the cheap seats. And I think the vast majority of criticism comes in that form.
Yeah. So you navigated quite a lot in there, and a lot of the cliches sound good, but I guess that they're relevant to the scenario
Absolutely
that you're in, and leadership calls for different types of behaviors in different situations. You talk about leading from behind. That's actually a thing. There's invisible leadership too, where you're not micromanaging.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about that situations call for different types of leadership?
Sure. This is a topic that I definitely sink my teeth into. Many of the people that will listen to this are probably situated in some capacity on LinkedIn. And if I was to scroll on LinkedIn for more than 5 scrolls, I'm going to see some sort of post about authentic leadership, collaboration, servant leadership, as to name a few. Coaching and mentoring will get a great rap as well. Okay. I don't know what authentic leadership means. I don't get it. I don't understand. I get what the word authentic means, and I know what leadership means to me, but I don't understand the practical application of it. I'll give you an example. If I rewind the clock, I mentioned before, you know, the context of combat fighting in one such example. I was 22 years old, 40 soldiers under my command, just turned 22 and about to give the orders to initiate our first gunfight. We got the jump on them. We got the winning hand. Huzzah. Good days. Now, what do you think was happening inside my head at the time of that event? It certainly doesn't look like the photos that I've retrospectively looked back on. The photos show almost like a robotic face, very stoic, almost like an Easter Island statue, unflappable. And that's about 10 seconds before I would give that order to kill 3 people and start that gunfight. Well, what was happening inside my head, and I got to be careful not to swear on a podcast, but it wasn't particularly hygienic, right? And it was quite negative. There was a lot of self-doubt. There was a lot of question about whether I'm a good enough leader. How did I get myself in this situation? Am I going, like, I'm about to order someone to kill someone. Like, is there any coming back from this? Is this going to ruin me for life? Am I going to get PTSD? And these are all the things. These are all the rationalizations happening. What the soldiers needed was a rock solid statue. And I remember them kind of looking at my face because some of them, it was their first gunfight as well. Some of them, not so much. But they were looking at me to gauge whether we were or were not going to commit and do this thing well. Now, imagine if I had just leant over to my sniper in that particular photo, because my sniper is right there, another one right there. And I was like, should we be doing this? Is this a good idea? Right. Immediately, we most would agree. I've not yet met a person who has disagreed, who would say, well, of course, because that would not be a particularly resourceful or helpful way to aid the situation. And so then you go, okay, well, is there anything authentic about that photo? And the answer is no. There's nothing authentic about that photo. It is a complete fabricated lie. I was faking it in order to improve the situation. Now, as it would happen, 3 days later, one of my soldiers would come up to me, and he was actually a very well-established veteran. He'd served on multiple combat tours in different theaters. He came up to me and he said, "How you going, boss?" And I was like, "Good." And he goes, "Hey, how did you find those last 3 days? It's your first gunfights, isn't it?" And I went, "Yep." And he went, what was going through your head? Like, how are you feeling? And I was like, "Mate, I was completely freaking out the entire time." And I said it like that. I said I was completely freaking out the entire time. Didn't blink when I said it. And he went, "Geez, boss, you held it well." And he goes, "At least we know you hold it well." Now, that was the moment for authenticity. But it came 3 days later when I was wearing board shorts and a T-shirt and I had a rifle slung over my shoulder and I was just eating hot food from the mess. It didn't come on the battlefield at the time when I would have wanted to communicate it. So you go, okay, what do we make of all this? Well, then you start going through and you might start questioning some of the literature and you might start questioning some of the mantras that some people are pushing almost propagandistically, right? They're actually, they're saying there's one way to do this. And I'm a little bit dubious to commit to the same deductions. I'll give an example. So I mentioned before, servant leadership. I've got it written on the back of my shirt, for God's sake. You're talking to a team that has drunk the Kool-Aid on servant leadership. Let me make it absolutely explicitly clear from the beginning. But who do you think are our coaching clients at 8th Mile that come out of the blue? And the conversation starts like this. It goes, "Is this a safe space?" And I go, "What do you mean?" And they go, "It's not going to get to my boss. It's not going to get to my peers. It's not going to get to my staff. It's not going to get to my partner." And you go, no. It's not getting to anyone. What do you got to say? There's something on your mind. What do you got to say? And they normally have to collect themselves. And they take a couple of deep breaths and then they go, "These bloody people. I'm sick of them. I bend over backwards. I have an open door policy. They're constantly pushing their anxieties onto me all the time, day and night, after hours, before hours, during work. I don't get any time to do my own work. And then they then criticize me that I'm not doing my work. I'm not getting the strategy and I'm not doing this." And they're like, "I'm sick of these people." And there's a dark, resentment-filled cloud around the person. And what that is, as far as I can figure out, is a transition for someone who started off with the best of intentions as a servant leader, with no boundaries, no protections, no constraints. And bit by bit, they drifted over to the dark side. It's like Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. And they don't even know what happened. And then they have to meet with another servant leader, be like, it's okay, you're not going insane. People will use you, but we need to build some boundaries in and we'll bring you back to the light side.
Yeah.
But that's servant leadership, highly vulnerable. Empathetic leaders are highly vulnerable to that as well.
Yeah.
They put themselves out, accept everyone's weight, and then no boundaries, and then they end up becoming dark and resentful people. And it's not through an intent, it's just delivery. It's the way it played out.
Yeah.
They thought they were immune, is another way to think about it. If I was to talk about collaboration, I mean, if I wrote a post about collaborative leadership on LinkedIn, I'd get all the stars. I'd get all the impressions, all the likes, all the shares. Happy days. But I might, in my mind, be selling out a little bit. And the reason is, collaboration is amazing if you want to solve a complex problem. Particularly true if you've got resources and time as well. If you've got those three combination, collaborative leadership is a great mechanism to build robust, heavily tested plans that serve the test of time. There's no question about it. We would not have got to the moon, and for all those conspiracy theorists who don't think we went to the moon, we would not have been able to conspire to pretend to get to the moon had we not had collaborative leadership, right? Fair enough. But if anyone who's worked in government for any length of time might also have a quick chuckle when I say this. Why would you need a document that needs 7 signatures for approval? Why does that document exist? And what does it look like if you have a room full of all managers and no leaders, and they're completely devoid of action or initiative? What are they waiting for? And people go, oh, well, they're waiting for a leader. Okay, fair enough. When you start thinking about people as scared, evolutionary-driven creatures that are self-serving most of the time, and you play the devil's advocate, people are inherently good and inherently bad, and we are both, and we try and integrate and become centered people. Fair enough. Well, then you go, okay, they're scared creatures. What are they waiting for? A leader. Okay. What do they want the leader to be? Or what do they want the leader to do? They want a scapegoat. They want someone to take the hit if it all goes wrong. And until they get that someone, they will wait and stall for time. If they're not stalling for time, they'll get busy doing unusual tasks to look busy, right? But either way, the net result is the same thing. They're waiting for a leader to act as a scapegoat, to take the impact when it all goes wrong. If they can't find that leader, they're going to adopt a new set of behaviors. And what they'll do is start distributing risk out to other people in the form of 7 signature documents. And what they're doing is hiding in plain sight. So if it all goes to crap, they can point at 6 other people and go, well, you better get everyone in the room. And by the way, one's on maternity leave and one's got a sick kid today. And so we're going to have to push that back a couple of weeks. And it's a buffer. It's a protection mechanism. It's an ass covering exercise. So collaboration has pros and cons as well, but no one ever wants to speak about the negative detractors of collaboration. If I talked about transformational leadership, you know, the Elon Musks, the people who shoot for the stars, and literally, you know, and you say Elon Musk, and I might pick an arbitrary number of 100,000 staff under his remit if you combined all these different organizations together. And I said, okay, fair enough. That's amazing stuff. We're trying to get to Mars. We're trying to buy social media platforms. We're creating electronic, you know, environmentally friendly vehicles, etc., etc. The list goes on. Replacements for lithium, blah, 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 blah. All of it. Fair enough. But can you imagine being his operational staff? Do you think you're going to get a coaching and mentoring style of leadership? Even just ones and zeros, nuts and bolts, just seconds in a day. He just does not have enough time to even coach and mentor even the top executives of each of the organizations. There are just too many, and he won't get anything else done. So in many ways, transformational leadership positions itself as the antithesis for coaching and mentoring. The best he could probably hope for is to get his understudy, whoever the next Elon is, to adopt that role, and he could grow one of him to create more of them later on. But that's about the best you could hope for, right? If I went transactional leadership and I put that on LinkedIn, I'm going to get smashed. I'm probably going to get kicked off the platform again. But who's ever been involved in a relationship for any length of time, and you give 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 and you give, and then you finally ask for one favor in return and they don't answer the call? They're like, I'm busy that day. And you go, I didn't tell you the date. Yeah, I'm still busy that day. And you go, okay, if I called transactional leadership reciprocity, that'll get straight through to the keeper. They won't hit the objections.
Yeah.
To transact is to reciprocate. They're a synonym.
Yeah.
And so I don't think people are thinking about the utility of these leadership styles. Another one, this one gets absolutely slammed. Autocratic or authoritarian leadership. Fair enough. No one likes a tyrant. No one likes being told what they have to do. People like to be involved in the process of decision making, to be part of the change. Fair enough. You'll get no pushback from me. But I'm also a father. I've got 3 kids. I work in the prison systems. I work with some of the most nefarious people you will ever meet. Some of them have committed the most heinous crimes I can conceive of. Now, knowing that means I have a different frame of reference. Now, just say, for hypothetical state, that an individual did something to my children, and many of the parents here are probably shifting in their seat. Good. I'm glad, because now we're understanding the gravity of the situation. And say that the legal system gets to them before I do, and they still have a pulse. Okay, and now proceed to go down that path even further. And we go through this lengthy, frustrating, painful, traumatic legal process for 2 to 3 years to put this person behind bars where they belong. We get to that point. The jury goes guilty. Happy days. We'll reconvene here in a week. The judge will lay the sentence. And then we all reconvene. I'm like, right, it's time. Justice is about, we're finally going to get closure on this chapter in our life. We can close, we can start healing. And the judge goes, yeah, exactly. Time served, back on the street, little program here and there, bit of community service. Now, me as a father, you might see me activate charismatic leadership at that point. And I'm going to create a cult to try and return this back the way it needed to go. I'm going to tip over cop cars. I'm going to be on 60 Minutes. I'm going to do all sorts of stuff until I'm heard, until justice is served. And that's what happens when we need an authoritarian leader. And let's make no bones about it. A judge is an authoritarian precedent level leader. If we don't get one when we need one, then we get the creation of new social movements that feel aggrieved due to the lack of justice. Me Too would be a good example of that. When we needed an authoritarian leader, what we got was a laissez-faire leader. The Bob Marley, Rastafarian, chilled, she'll be right kind of personality. Now, in the right context, that's a very powerful leader. It's a calming influence in chaotic time. No issues, no concerns. But when we need someone to step up and start gripping up a situation, think a car accident, do you want a laissez-faire leader gripping that up, or do you want an autocratic authoritarian person who knows what they're doing, like a cop, to come and just get out of the vehicle and start pointing fingers and taking names and getting problems solved? Yeah, I think almost everyone will go, yeah, I kind of want that one. Micromanagement. People slam micromanagement. Micro meaning small, management meaning the pursuit of order. Well, who's ever arrived at a job and had no idea what you're doing, let alone an unsafe or safe job, depending on what job role you've gone into? There's no one to tell you what to do. Yeah. And you're just like, would someone show me how to use this lathe, or how to use this piece of equipment, or this welder, or whatever? Like, I've never used this thing. Could someone, inch by inch, step by step, tell me and micromanage the hell out of me so I know what the hell I'm doing? For me, it was learning rifles. I didn't come from a gun family. I didn't want a laissez-faire corporal. I wanted the scary one who knew his staff back to front, who had been on the weapon systems for years, who took no prisoners and took names, and would go, don't pick it up like that. Do it like this. No, not like that. Put it back down. Because that actually instilled confidence in the process that we were going through. I'm not going to make a mistake here and kill everyone around me with my 30-round assault rifle or my 200 belt machine gun. So when we're talking about these different leadership styles, I think it's time we start looking at them with a bit more sophistication. If you do believe what's on my shirt and it says, leadership is not about you, you go, okay, Well, who's it about? Well, it's about our people. Okay. If it's about our people, who do they need us to be right now in order to improve the situation? We're caught around the axles talking about what leader we want to be. It's not what you want, it's what needs to be provided. And that is, I think, at the essence of situational leadership, which is what we're essentially beating around the bush here, is you can be a servant leadership that puts others before self, and you can bolt on situational leadership, and you can go, there are different tools to the trade here. And people need me to be different things in order to make the world a better place. And it's less about what I want, more about what is required. And I think if we start approaching it with that level of sophistication, we might actually see some leaders feel like they've got more tools. Because at the moment, many of them feel like they're fighting a fight with their hands tied behind their back. And they've only got reward systems, be really nice to people and it will all work out, and put others before self. And they're spiraling. And it's not working. It's not holding up.
Now, let's take a short break to share some software we recommend.
Hey, StreamYard is my go-to platform for creating this podcast. What makes StreamYard a game changer is its ease of use. It's actually the reason I chose it myself, is because it seamlessly allows me to invite guests to record on my podcast. Now, if you're someone who's looking to go live to multiple platforms at the same time, then you really need to consider whether StreamYard's for you. The other thing it offers is local recording, which allows me to separate my files and my guest files so I have full creative control over the process. They're constantly adding new features, including an AI generator that now generates short form content with captions from the long form videos that I record on the platform. If you're someone who's looking to start a podcast, or perhaps you're in business and you want to create a webinar, then StreamYard has a tier for you, including a free option, which gives you no excuse not to give it a try today. So if you want to level up your own content creation, then make sure you check out my affiliate link in the description below, and you can get started creating with StreamYard today.
Now, let's get back to our guest.
When you talk about all those different types of leadership, the different situations call for the leadership, but it seems the conversation is that an authoritarian leader is not a good thing, or a laissez-faire leader is not a good thing. When in fact, at certain times, I know from my sporting background, I've been a person I didn't want to be, the authoritarian leader, on the basis of it was what was required at the time to get people to buy in, I guess, to what was needed. And a lot of the time it's around outcome. It's around what are we trying to achieve here, the end game, not the actual trying to placate to everyone. It's like, well, to achieve this, we need to do X, and to do X, I need you to do X.
Yeah, exactly. And so you know, I'm going to fabricate a hypothetical scenario here, but you can imagine, and I've seen I've had the good fortune of working with some of the best leaders on the planet. You see them, right? They walk into one room and they're a coach and mentor. They drop down to a knee, they adjust their their tone, their style, their cadence. They relate, they build rapport. They're basically leaning into this oxytocin-driven approach, one-on-one, loyalty-driven behavior. And they stand up, they walk another 10 meters, and then they notice something that is a safety incident. And then they turn into an authoritarian or autocratic leader. Then they walk another 10 meters and they walk past the conference room and they realize, oh, damn, I need to jump into transformational here. The board's getting together. This is about strategy. It's about long-term play. It's about concepts. It's about cerebral approach. It's all about all of that. Then they walk another couple of steps and now it's about someone's contract for their employment. Well, now it's transactional. I'll do this for you if you do this for me. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. These are the terms and conditions. And they keep walking. And now it's like someone's really stressed. And so they're like, hey, let's go down for a coffee. And now they're laissez-faire. And it's like, in one day, they could be all forms of leadership. And they're switching and changing all the time. Now, that's exhausting, by the way. That kind of sucks for anyone who's like, I don't know if leadership's for me. It's like, yeah, fair enough. That is an exhausting prospect. But it's no different to being a parent.
I was going to say, you pretty much describe parenting from a good parent perspective. I'm sure there's some that don't go through that journey, but most parents are probably in different moments with their kids experiencing those different levels of leadership, because that's what you just described.
And no parent likes to be the bad cop.
Mm.
No,
Well, because there's guilt that goes with.
No one wants that position because it sucks,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, I hate being the disciplinarian. But I also know the literature quite well on the implications of not having kids socialized by certain age brackets. 4 to 4.5 is a great example, particularly pertaining to boys. If they're not socialized, as in the opposite of antisocial, if they're not socialized by the age of 4.5, well, the trajectory for them ends in places like where I work routinely, which is in the prison system. And the data is clear on this. It's like boundaries will set you free in this regard. And if one parent isn't going to be doing it, the other one might have to step up. And that's a tough thing to bear, because one is buying love and one is trying to do something to see their child succeed and positioning themselves almost as Batman bad cop. And that's an unenviable position, and that many marriages end over that dynamic, because they're like, well, you just position me. I would love to be the one that just buys them all the things they want, but it's actually not doing them any favors. And so in the family household, you will see a parent that is taking their job seriously morph and chameleon and change to different situations. The best video I ever saw of this was an American lady, and she's in Tokyo, and there's a very large earthquake taking place, and she's in a restaurant, and she has a young kid, a toddler, bouncing on her knee, and she's putting on her stoic face, and the whole restaurant is just going violently shaken. Everything's falling off the tables. I can only imagine the inside dialogue for that mother was, is this the last time I hold my child, or something to that effect? And the kid's just looking at mum, just straight up, just looking at mum. And the kid presumably is looking to see whether this is or is not a bad case. Like, is this dangerous? And I'm going to use mum as the litmus test to determine to what extent this is dangerous and whether we're going to die or not. And she's looking at mum, and mum's unflappable. She's like, we're fine. We're doing good. Bouncing her knee, kid's bouncing. She's like, nice. This is good. We're having a good time. And the kid's just like fascinated by mum. And you know what? That mum's probably got therapy to do after that. And the kid was of an age that won't remember it.
Yeah.
So the kid doesn't have some anchored trauma. The mum got the job done. And now, retrospectively, the mum's probably got some work to do to try and come to terms with how she handled it and what was done, and the mortality of man and all that those sorts of existential issues. But that comes afterwards. What she did on the day was the exact tool for the job to make it improve situation.
Yeah.
And I think to that end, you're asking the right questions here, in the sense that it's like, well, the question is not, do these leadership styles have utility? It's, when do they have utility, and how do you apply them to best effect? They're different questions.
Yeah.
That's a completely different line of questioning that leads you down different research, different investments, all of it.
See, I see that as invisible leadership, this concept of that people look for their leaders to give cues that doesn't require any of the authoritarian style or the laissez-faire style. It's just, well, we're looking to the leader to see how they're handling the situation, and we get it. And as you did when you were in the military situation, they're looking at you and you've just, said, I need you to fire upon these people and we're going to take some lives here. Like that, in that moment, you say it's a million things going through your head, but you're basically looking at the situation and you're making that assessment. You hit on two really important things there. You talked about parenting, and I'm wondering how this translates into the leadership environment, which is you use two key motivators here, which is love and fear, which is the good cop, bad cop.
Yep.
So how much, or how do you motivate someone? How are leaders using those tools, and what other tools do they have to motivate people? Because they're the two that most people, we see it in politics, we see people using love and fear to motivate people to, say, vote for them.
Yeah.
But how are those tools, and when are they the best time to use and perhaps the worst?
It's a great question. I think you've done everyone a service here, because you've asked the question in the right way. Some people have already come to the deduction that there is no place for fear in leadership. That is not true. That is not a healthy way to look at these problems. And there's a couple of ways to unpack this. If I was to go down the world of neuroscience, I could talk about bodily chemicals, the endocrinal system, and whatnot. And I might even dare to do that. If I was talking about chemicals that are naturally produced, that make you feel good, I would land in territory like dopamine, which is goal-based. People call it the reward drug. It's more the anticipation or expectation of a reward drug, not the actual taking or consuming of the drug itself. Serotonin would be your community drug, how you feel you're placed, whether you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right people, in brackets, safety. I could go endorphins, endo drawn from endocrinal, and morphine. It's a naturally produced morphine. And I could play around with those three chemicals and I could go, well, they're running toward drugs. Particularly when we're talking about dopaminergically mediated systems, you're actually talking about it's that drive to hunt something, to create something new. Well, the literature started to really find its stride in the late 60s. And you had gentlemen like Jaak Pansep and B.F. Skinner who were trying to play around in this space. And Jaak Pansep in particular did some amazing work. And he started looking at fear systems, fear and stress and anxiety systems. And what he found was if you ran a series of experiments with, say, a rat, and you put a reward in front of it, you'll get a baseline drive. And it's seeking. So it's kind of pulling on a spring-loaded aggregated system that will give you a score, a net score. So that's what it looks like when you have a reward in front of you, a motivational system, call it. What would it look like if you put the smell of a cat behind the rat? Well, then you activate a different system, which is, the stress and anxiety system, the amygdala hijack. You're playing around with a chemical known as cortisol, and then they bridge that together and call it adrenocortisol, cortisol being the fight, flight, or freeze response. Well, then you get these huge surges of energy, but not sustainable. They only last about half as long. But the net score is still about 3 times what it was for just dopamine. Fair enough. You take this experiment to its logical conclusions, and then you start playing in factors of strength of pull. When you have a rat that is running towards something and running from something simultaneously, it has something in the order of 20 times. Now, it can't pull harder than it did in the second experiment. It's only got so much strength, so much muscle sinew, but it pulls for longer, way longer. And then you go, well, where are you going with this, Dave? What's the point of going through some crazy lab experiment with the rat from, late 60s, early 70s? And the answer is this. Virtually no one I speak to can explain to me where discipline gets its energy from. They just can't. They just don't. They don't think about it. They go, and they explain it, and that's not having a gripe on people. They just didn't have 3.5 years to peruse on this problem, and maybe the length of our team did, right? Yeah. So we had a couple of different ways to crack this nut. But motivation and rewards, they get that. They go, yep, motivation, it's a goal, it's seeking, it's tantalizing. It's like, I set myself a fitness goal or something like that, a New Year's resolution. Well, that's all dopaminergically mediated. That's all seeking system. Why do people stop? Why do they get to February and they give up? Why don't they hold something for long enough that it becomes routine or habitual? Because most of the literature would say you need to hold a pattern of behavior for long enough for the goals to take effect, for it then to be established as a new routine or a new protocol in your mind. But we don't do it for long enough for it to become habitualized. Why? Well, discipline is anchored in a different energy source. It's adrenocortisol. The most disciplined people you will ever meet are almost entirely powered by what they don't want to be, what they don't want to be remembered as, how they don't want to lose the fight or whatever it is. I think back now and people go, oh, the military is so disciplined. Why are they so disciplined? Because they don't like dying. And that's really scary. And more importantly, they don't like the idea of them not putting in the training and that being resultant on one of their friends being killed.
Yeah.
It was guilt. It was shame. It was fear that drove the discipline. It wasn't I wanted a medal. It was I didn't want to let down my mates. I had a number of soldiers. In fact, that photo I was mentioning before, one got a Distinguished Service Medal on my left, and the other one got a Medal of Gallantry for bravery. And I've asked those individuals why they did what they did, and without fail, they say the same sentence, and they didn't have the ability to collaborate their answer. I didn't want to let down my mates. It's double negative language. It's fear.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, we rewind the clock a little bit. You go, well, where's he going with this? Is he saying just be a psychopath and, be a tyrant and hit people with the lash and they'll do what? No, I'm not. And there are a couple of models that conclusively prove that. The stress performance curve is a great way to just open up that conversation, which ironically doesn't present as a curve in the literature at all. It presents as a cliff. It comes, I'll try and do it for the camera, back to front and, whatnot, but it goes up on quite a uniform trajectory. It hits what we call the plateau period, where more stress does not equate to more performance, right?
Yeah.
It just plateaus. And it's also identified with what we call uncharacteristic behaviors, where you see someone do something that's just not in their personality. It's just very weird for them to have been doing. If it was a quiet person being outspoken, it might be an outspoken person being quiet. It might be someone who's detail focused being nonchalant. Either way, it'll be some sort of uncharacteristic behavior. But if you keep cranking the stress past a certain point, it falls off a cliff. And in a very short amount of time, you'll cause sometimes irreparable damage. So no, I'm not suggesting that you just go out with the lash and keep lashing till you get the results you want. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I'm also saying that there is a time in order to communicate context in such a way that if we don't get certain things right, people know the gravity of the situation. And that's actually making it about a problem, not a person.
Yeah.
And it's a very valuable place to be. As an example, our business, the concept of a business is something that provides a good or a service.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you provide a service, almost definitionally, your job is to absorb stress and anxiety on behalf of the client. That's your whole point of relevance. If your mantra at work is, we don't have stress at work, or we're trying to remove stress, then I hope you get prepared to remove your relevance from the market, because that's your single point of call. Like that's what you do.
Yeah.
So it's like you're going to attack the very thing that you proclaim to provide. So buckle in for everything that comes with that. So it's like, it's not no stress, but it's what are the right types of stress? What are the right mechanisms of communicating it? How can we do it in such a way that it actually helps people, not harms them? Talk to any alcoholic who finally gets their life back in check. It's got to get work. It's got to hit rock bottom before it comes scary enough to consider the gravity of the situation. Until then, it's denial, 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 denial. And then there hits a point where they're completely lonely, completely isolated. And then they go, oh, there's no one else to blame. And then they go, I might need to work on this. Well, that's actually going to be a fear response that gives them the nudge to get going. And then if we've got all our ducks in a row and we've set the conditions, well, then once they start doing the right goals, they'll start getting wins. And when they get wins, we're back in dopamine territory where we want to be, where everyone loves being. But it's not to say that didn't have utility. That stuff saves lives.
Yeah.
But everything's it's a double-edged sword. Cortisol in and of itself, if you just stay in what we call a cortisol flux for any length of time, people who remain in that state for lengthy periods of time can expect to die 10 or 15 years younger than everyone else and are highly prone to cancers, diseases, wasting ailments and everything in between. that was a study conclusively proven 7 years ago in South Australia. Like cortisol is directly linked to these things now. So, I come from a very militaristic environment where we used to mock hippies, and it turns out they were actually onto something.
Okay.
They were right. Choosing to hold on to anger is one such example. Was like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. And so it doesn't kind of work that way. So this is a game of tolerances more than it is do's and don'ts. And for some people to say there is no place for a leader to be even contemplating using fear, well, they're not playing at the level that the elite leaders play at. They need to be playing with everything, but they need to be doing it well. Doctors use fear to save lives.
Okay.
If you do this, you will die.
Yeah.
That's like you need to get your life in order. That's not a goal. That's a running from. That's a cat smell. And so we need to be just a little bit more sophisticated about the way we think about it.
So as you're speaking, I'm thinking about an interview that I did with Brandon Steiner, who basically bought and sold Yankee Stadium off of the members, right? And he was talking about how he's a memorabilia mogul in the US, but how he was uncomfortable on a train and how that was a motivating factor for him. So as you're speaking, maybe love and fear is one factor, but when you talk about discipline or self-discipline and the decisions we make to motivate ourselves, and I'm not sure how this fits with, say, motivating others, but comfort and discomfort as a means of motivating yourself and potentially, I guess, others in those situations is being uncomfortable or being comfortable can be dangerous in some instances.
Can be very dangerous. Comfort could be the thing that kills you. And look, this question about what makes people tick. I mean, leadership is essentially trying to crack that nut in its rawest form. Well, there's a long-standing philosophical argument that tries to solve this and goes, and the people have debated this for thousands of years. The Stoics started unraveling it. But it goes, thesis one, people's behaviors are predominantly anchored in motivation and rewards. Fair enough. I'll do something because there's something in it for me. Fair enough. Second thesis, people's behaviors are predominantly anchored in fear or the prevention of pain. Well, you got to ask yourself, why is it that you could offer someone reward, 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 shiny thing, shiny thing, shiny thing, and they don't adopt a new behavior? Without fail, if you're playing around in reward territory and you're not getting the result, the answer is there is some underlying fear that you have not correctly or adequately mapped yet that is holding them back. And people go, oh, you're going a bridge too far. And you go, okay, why would someone stay in an abusive relationship for 20 years and never leave? When there are shelters, when there are support groups, when there are police, when there are phone calls, when there are, other friends that can help, family, why do they stay? Well, I'd rather dance with the devil I know than the devil I don't. And the fear of uncertainty is so significant and potent that the person will go, one more day, I'll see how it goes. And they'll rationalize it away. 20 years will pass and they will have gone through so many thousands of iterations of going, well, at least I know this devil. If I jumped out, I could be homeless. I could find someone even worse. I could I could end up with the kids in no school. I could lose the kids. We could get hurt. I'm going to stay one more day. And 20 years pass, right? So why would that be relevant? Well, leaders are often trying to create change. That's almost the definition of what leadership is. Leaders coordinate change. Managers coordinate complexity. Well, if you're trying to change things and you're trying to convince someone to adopt a new suite of behaviors and they're not moving, well, what territory do you now need to start playing in to try and get a different result? Because you're going to keep doing the same thing. You're going to keep dangling shiny stuff and they're not moving. Maybe we need to go figure out what's holding them back. And that means diving into scary territory. And in some cases, and this is where people would now start to get their backs up, sometimes, particularly in the prison system as an example, I've got repeat offenders. The program is designed to stop recidivism. And so far, it's the best program we know of that's achieved the results that it does. Well, they're in prison. Like, it sucks in there. It's pretty bad. But we don't want them to keep coming back. So in many cases, I have to replace our fear with another fear.
Yeah.
What about the fear of being an absent dad? What about the fear of not being remembered? The fear of this, the fear of that. And that gets them going. Then they commit to doing new goals. And then we as facilitators and mentors watch highly intently, almost with the love languages for the ladies out there who love that literature, ready to reward in as many ways as possible when they start doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so absolutely leadership needs to be playing around in this space if you're going to do it well. If you're going to half-ass it, then maybe it's not the territory you need to play in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you draw your knowledge and experience on leadership from?
It comes from a myriad of different sources. I think as a brand, we have positioned ourselves very differently to a lot of our maybe competitors in the industry. We draw a lot from historical vignettes. We spend a lot of time in history. We're convinced that the answers are not forward, they're backward. And I think people have a nasty habit of repeating history. Next one will be sociology. That would be a big fascination for our team. Third one will be psychology. Fourth one would be neuroscience. And then the fifth one would be centered around personal and professional development literature. But across the suite, we jump in the experience from the historical case studies. We often use a lot of our own case studies where we got it wrong, all the way through to the academic side. And you can understand why. We're some days we're in a prison or we're in blue collar mines and we're in the middle of like Mumbai in the middle of nowhere. And then the next day we can be in a suit in a white collar corporate in a Fortune 500 company working with the corporate staff. So you can understand that the type of content that we will provide will shift and change quite dramatically depending on the client that we're working with. Sometimes and not surprising, you'll find that the blue collar people generally like hands-on experience, case studies, vignettes, examples where you are proclaiming what you did wrong and what you got right and what you learned from it. They respond very well to story. White collar corporate, normally, and I'm not trying to put people into boxes here, but it's just playing the game, for the purpose of the discussion. More academic, more evidence-based, more science-based. And so we have had to learn both realms quite well. And at times we'll play this and then jump over here and jump back, and vice versa. We'll jump over here, jump back. But yeah, that would be my one observation on that space.
Yeah. So you've got a history as a military officer as well and had deployments to Afghanistan. Do you want to speak a little bit about your training as well and how that has helped you realize that leadership comes in all different shapes and sizes?
One thing I'd say about it is there's a bit of a misconception that the leadership in the military is better than the leadership in other places. Now, I was kind of hacking away at that idea before about what constitutes good types of leadership and bad types of leadership. I think it runs a very dangerous game of what we call dichotomies. It's either good or bad, it's on or off, it's binary, whatever. The leadership in the military was bad as well. It was good and it was bad. There were great leaders, there were, less than impressive ones and everything in between. The only difference I would say is it just had a bit more of a prescriptive screening process to getting to finding its leaders, which is probably above what maybe the corporate or commercial world might partake in. And so, an officer going through their leadership training might go 3 years at Australian Defence Force Academy, a year at the Royal Military College if they're in the Army. Then they might end doing a technical specialization. In my case, it was infantry, foot soldiering. But that's almost like a 5-year process to get to the time that you have troops.
Yeah.
And they've gotten you young too. Like they've got you from 17 or 18 and they've just put you in this bubble and they're like leadership, values, leadership, values, just like hammering it into you. But I had a bit of a disagreement with another military officer semi-recently, maybe about a year ago, on another podcast. And the assumption was that leadership is inherently teachable and that it's not born. You're not born with it. I saw that on your board before.
Yeah,
So I thought I'd insist.
the old
Yeah,
argument of
yeah.
are people born leaders or made leaders?
Yeah, they born, or is it nature versus nurture? Well, the argument went, well, we have schools of leadership. So if it's not teachable, what the hell are we doing here anyway? Fair enough. But what that failed to recognize was the screening process to find those with natural talent, to then inject them into that closed off bubble. There was both. They had natural talent based on their personality types, their life experience, bolting on with their personality and refining their character. And then they entered the game. And then they were like, that's a good start point. And then it was leadership training and training and training. But because they already had the characteristics, it's kind of like you're a basketball coach. All basketball players are tall, generally speaking. Paddy Mills was at my school. He's not particularly tall, but he's particularly talented. Right? So he's a bit of a freak. But most of them are no less than 6'4" at the professional level. Would that be a fair read?
Yeah.
No less. Okay, so if you were going to try and create an elite basketball team, would you go to the smallest people you can find and start there?
No.
No, because it's not the right characteristic for the job, for the role. So what you might do if you didn't have anywhere better to start is you'd go start finding tall, talented, athletic people who do like sports, volleyball, netball, maybe even rowing, like whatever. You can find tall levered, high cardio, explosive power when it's required, aerobic fitness, enough intelligence that they can learn. And you would probably start with like school programs and start talent scouting and da-da-da-da-da. But you wouldn't be getting those personality or body types if you wanted to, I don't know, create a gymnast. That would be the wrong person. You want short, small, explosive, high power to weight ratio. They're different athletes for different jobs, different functions. So with regard to the leadership nature versus nurture thing, I think people do have varying levels of natural or raw talent. And then the military, what it does well is it takes that and then filters out the rough. In ADFA, I think we lost, which is Australian Defence Force Academy, we lost about 50% of people in the first 3 years. But then at RMC, which is the Royal Military College, you lose about another 50% again in the next year. And then you lose another percentage when you go into the technical training. And then if any of those people go on to special forces, there's now another whole new attrition rate that starts again. But it's actually withering people out of the game so that what's left is good stock. And so the military does that well. I actually really enjoyed that process because I used to do karate at a national level and I liked competition. I liked being tested and I liked having my character tested and growing stronger, and the military did that.
Leaders who aren't understanding why they're not getting the best out of their teams, is that something you work with?
The short answer is yes, but is a nuanced game to be played. A rookie will come in and walk up to their sponsor, who's a leader, who's probably quite genuinely having frustrations with their team. And along that journey, we'll recognize that the sponsor is probably the problem here, okay, or a big part of it. Well, they've got one of two options. They either say something or they don't say anything. This is that standard you walk past versus, pick your battles. Now, for me, in almost all of those cases, I'll pick my battles. I'll start engaging with the team, trying to start setting the conditions to have them open to the idea of change, just in general, for themselves and for the leader. And bit by bit, normally the leader, if I'm asking the right kinds of questions, I'm making sure they're engaged in the process. Almost without fail, they'll go, "It's me, isn't it?" And the moment they ask the question, then I'll go, yeah, big part of it. Not all of it, big part of it. They need to get to that point where they're willing to ask that question, because if I come out of the gates and just go, "It's you," well, there's a couple of things that could happen. They'll just kick me out of the business and I can't help anyone there anyway. So I'm completely useless. or they're going to get their back up and become highly defensive because it wasn't the right place and time. And then the same net result happens anyway. So there's a game to be played to show the value of self-awareness, what we're doing with the team, demonstrate by example. But once we've exhausted the vast majority of those conversations, the question goes, well, where do we go from here? And normally it's around that time the leader goes, this is me, isn't it? Yeah. We've got a bit of work to do. But they've now had the first step towards their own self-measurement, their own self-understanding.
Yeah, so they're brought in a degree of EQ there to be self-aware. So when is leadership dangerous?
I think all you need to do is have a look in history to see the damages of certain leadership styles when they go to the logical conclusions. Charismatic leaders in particular, charismatic leadership is a very, very powerful tool. It allows leaders to influence people with virtually no resources. Like from a business perspective, it's like, come on, don't be so quick to throw that one in the bin.
So can you give an example of what that might look like?
Yeah, so a charismatic leader is someone who's got the gift of the gab. They're very good at reading mannerisms, idiosyncrasies. They're very good at creating story. So they're very good at creating running to and running from effects, and they normally are playing with all those elements I mentioned before. The problem with charismatic leadership is that you better hope that that person is morally aligned. And I'm not just saying values here, because values can be the curse in this regard. They can be the cure and the curse. A charismatic leader can drag a huge number of people off the center line in very short time. Don't ever underestimate the potency of a charismatic leader. All cults start and end with a charismatic leader. And the irony is, if you ever want to overthrow a charismatic leader to get someone better in there, you normally need another charismatic leader because nothing's going to dislodge them.
Yeah.
No amount of autocracy or authoritarian or laissez-faire or servant, no, it won't dislodge them. They've got too much influence, too much power. Right? So it's like charismatic leadership. This is an example where leadership goes wrong. People go, oh, leadership is only in the pursuit of good. It's like, no, it's good, it's bad, it's ugly, it's everything in between. And some of the tools of the trade open themselves up to topics like we were going to talk about dark tetrads and things of that nature. Well, leadership can most definitely go bad. I mean, look at Hitler, look at Stalin. I mean, and even look at those two leaders. They were actually very different leaders.
Yeah.
Hitler was charismatic. Stalin was autocratic.
Yeah.
Stalin was by the books. He was a secretary before he adopted that role. He was detail focused and he managed people and he managed information. That's how he got into power. Hitler used a fear campaign. He used charisma, nous. The stomping of the fist on the lectern, the rallies, all of that. Very different styles. But their societies ultimately ended up with the same destructive behaviors, even though they adopted different leadership styles. So absolutely leadership can go wrong. Some people cite particular studies about the overrepresentation of psychopathy with CEOs as one such example. And I think it's a really good chat to have because on the surface that looks terrible. But who do you think is going to be the person to fire a third of the workforce to save the remaining 2/3? Someone who probably has less empathy but more pragmatism. And in doing so, they save 2/3 of the workforce. Whereas if the aim of the game was don't let anyone down, they wouldn't make the hard call and the company goes under and everyone loses. So say what you will about psychopathy being overly represented, they also are the ones that can stay on a strategy or on a mission by not getting dragged off the center line by low-level, tactical, people-level problems. What do you want them to do? That's leading from the back. That's where they will position themselves, and that's probably where they're best affected.
Yeah.
So we got to think about this and just give the devil its due. They're playing around at the strategic level, which is predominantly mission and vision focused, where they can't practically be dragged down all the time into the weeds in order to maintain the direction of the ship. And if they do, the ship sinks and everyone dies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So pick your poison. You either want them to be able to detach in order to save. I mean, look at another example. When you do triage, you've got mass casualties,
Yeah.
whole bunch of injured people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you start triaging.
Mm.
Well, triaging is a brutal process because people get it wrong. They think, oh, the most hurt person is the one that gets the most help. Rarely is that true. The most hurt person, providing we think they can live, gets the highest likelihood of living is the one that gets. Well, you, by definition, in order to triage well, need to be unempathetic to some extent so that you can triage well in order to save them. So our resources will be used to save the maximum amount of lives. So in order to help you, I need to harm them.
Yeah.
So, and these are paradoxes.
It's a moral dilemma that's always comes up at the old railway.
The railway, yeah.
So there's situations where it calls for someone who's less empathetic to the situation, to the emotional decisions that go with making a decision, and someone with psychopathy may well be a better position to make that decision. How do other forms of the dark tetrad of psychopathy play a role here? Like you've got narcissism, sadism, and Machiavellianism.
Yep.
So do you want to speak to those?
Let's break them down. And look, I'm not a clinician, so and I know that there are plans in the works to get a clinician here to talk about it and a specialist in the field. So everyone, please be gentle. But essentially, it's this. So psychopathy is essentially anchored around a lack of empathy. Okay, they can remain task focused. People often mention sociopaths as well, not to be confused with psychopaths, although they sit broadly in the same section. The fundamental difference between a psychopath and a sociopath is a psychopath will very rarely lose their crap, right? They'll stay very focused. They can often, particularly if they've got high IQ, can pretend to be other things by just modeling the behavior.
Yeah.
Oh, this is what a nice person would say now. This is what an empathetic would, and this is how they would look, and this is how they would feel, and they can adopt that. They're doing it generally to get the mission over the line, but they're not genuinely feeling the things they're feeling about the person. Okay. A sociopath is prone to temper tantrums and anger, right? Because they're not in control of their faculties as much. Now, there's a far more in-depth piece of literature to go into there. I am making significant generalizations for the purpose of conversation, but essentially that's that realm. That's that psychopathy space. Narcissism is more anchored around what are you to me or what are you for me? Topics like narcissistic supply come into the conversation where someone feels the need for validation. And it's about image in large part and about, to a lesser extent, reputation, but more image. And the moment their host figures out the game and feels like they're being used, and that can take years, decades, entire lifetimes, when that finally happens, you'll find the person jumps over to someone new very, very quickly.
Yeah.
All right, that is quintessential narcissism. Now, you can have overt and covert narcissism. Overt will be, your Instagram scantily clad individuals who are just trying to do anything they can to get as many impressions to get that narcissistic supply buffed up. But a covert narcissist will often operate behind the scenes, and you will not necessarily know that they are one, but the person married to them sure as hell will. All right. And it will be very, very difficult for that person to explain what this person's actually like behind the scenes. Yeah. And people will be like, that can't be right because, and they'll be like, yeah, they got tricked.
Yeah.
Right. So that's that one. Machiavellianism is about political posturing. The term Machiavelli was a person who wrote a book called The Prince, and it was all about political posturing. And so it's how do I step on the graves of others in order to get higher?
Yeah.
Like, that would be a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Think political posturing is the way to think about it. Like, think politicians and stepping over each other to get to the top and become number one. So it's very hierarchical. It's very status-based.
Yeah.
And sadism. Well, sadism's a bit of a no-brainer. It links with a genuine enjoyment in seeing people in pain in various forms. So they actually genuinely enjoy seeing people hurt. Notwithstanding that this is a pretty dark topic, and also notwithstanding that you will see these traits in various figureheads.
Yeah.
But we all have these traits innate within us.
Yeah.
Now, when I run this in a workshop, if I have the time, I'll normally go, and particularly if I'm in the prisons working with inmates, I like to flag this discussion and go, well, if left unchecked, and that's the key word, if left unchecked, where do you think you might lean?
Yeah.
And they'll go, oh, narcissistic. They'll just tell you.
Yeah.
You know, Carl Jung and Freud, and we've heard those names before, and they had this concept about the integration of shadow, which was trying to bring in your dark side to integrate with your light side.
Yeah.
And not being naive to the fact you have a dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the biggest mistake history has ever shown, is that the people who say, nah, that would never happen to me, are the ones most prone to it happening. And I think if we looked around the world at the moment in the current political state, there would be examples of that happening all the time as we speak.
I think sadism, anyone who suggests they might not have that shadow, only has to think if they ever had laughed at a fail video on YouTube, for example. Like, so don't think you're that far from a sadist. If you have sat and binged, and there's some of those videos are extremely popular, so someone's getting pleasure out of someone else's pain somewhere.
Yeah. Why do we watch UFC? Why do we, you know, why
boxing?
I used to be a fighter, you know. So we all have these elements, and depending on the factors that trigger them, you can start seeing these personality traits come out. Now, the reason why I said it can be a good or a bad thing is that self-awareness piece we were anchoring in before is very, very, very valuable. Now, for me, self-confessed, I've got nothing to hide. If left unchecked, I'll lean towards psychopathy. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason for that is I come from a very independent raising. I had to do a lot of stuff myself. I was in contact sports where there's not a lot of empathy when you lose, and winning is the aim of the game. And then I joined defense, and then I had to fight bad guys around the world, and I had to make hard calls to, decide whether someone lives or doesn't die and whatever. Well, having that trait there has actually been times where I can go, everyone else is in distress right now, but I can rise above it.
Yeah.
Now, that works all up until you have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was a pivotal moment in my life where I'm like, hey, this lack of empathy bit, I was a bit of a hard ass, because for me, I was the internal dialogue, and I'm sure some of your listeners will, maybe if they're honest with themselves, might have some of the same confessions.
Yeah.
I would think things like, it's just your job, just do it. Like, don't overthink it. Like, this is not that hard. Like, why have I got to constantly lift your weight and my weight, right? It's like a lack of empathy. Yeah. They would be genuine feelings I had at times.
Yeah.
But then when I had kids, I was like, it's not going to be the greatest fatherly traits.
No
one likes a father like that. That's cold, robotic, great for building a thing, not great for, the relationships around it. So went down the work of doing what I proclaimed to tell other people to do. Started to learn empathy, started to read literature I found inherently boring. And I was like, what is this? It's like rainbows and lollipops and feelings and cuddles. And I'm playing around with love languages, and I'm playing around in all this territory. Books I've read 8 or 9 times now. And then I was like, there is something in this. And to the point where if you did it long enough, you could make it more habitual. Well, not surprisingly, those that maybe would be higher in trait psychopathy are also higher in trait AQ, as in intelligence, because they can detach and not get emotionally dragged into every single scenario with everything they've got. They outlast other people. So this topic of these dark tetrad traits, and there's a great book, and word to the wise, if you're going to read this, understand I am not telling you to adopt the behaviors. I'm telling you so that you understand what human behaviors are out there. But Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power would be an interesting one. Now, in that, I mentioned before, how do you overthrow a charismatic leader?
With another
We need a charismatic leader. So you need someone who probably has a traits narcissism.
Yeah.
because the charismatic leader needs to center it around them in order to position themselves as the figurehead to solve the thing. Think Jim Jones and the People's Temple, right? 930 odd dead people because he told them to drink the Kool-Aid, right? So you need, for them to be effective at it, they need to genuinely believe they're the Messiah or they're the solution. And then they need to convince other people that that is also true, and then we've got the combination solved. But then you need another charismatic leader to overthrow the Jim Joneses of the world, which in this case didn't happen, right? So you would need someone who, like, if say you were going to genuinely take on one of these leaders that you're like, this is toxic, this is creating this is the dark space, we need to get them out, and they're very well established. Well, you're going to have to start playing around with maybe some Machiavellian techniques or tactics. You're going to actually have to start thinking about, well, if I speak to this person, who do they know? And if I report them, where does it go? And if I talk to this group, could I maybe come in from this angle? And that's actually Machiavellian. That's political posturing. That's planning. That's strategy. And then you might go, I need to believe in myself and know that I'm the right person to replace them. Well, that's playing around in trait narcissism. And now when the going gets tough, I'm going to have to fire all the people that believed that this person was the Messiah. Well, now you're going to be playing around with psychopathy, a lack of empathy, because they've got mortgages and they've got a job and they're their only provider, but they got to go because of the greater cause. It's like, don't tell me we don't use these traits. When we have integrated that shadow, to use a Jungian or Freudian mechanism, you would say that you're using it knowingly, proportionate, and for the greater good. Now, for me, in my old world, and in my current world, when I'm working with inmates, I have to sometimes come across as a bit of a psychopath to talk to a psychopath. So I'm not going to go deeply empathetic at times when they're talking about terrible things they've done, because I don't want to be empathetic to that at that moment. I want them to look at me and go, oh, he gets me. He's one of me. And then later on, I'll activate empathy from a lens of understanding, not validation, and then try and bring them back over to a more resourceful pathway. But I'm going to have to match and mirror them with the scary person for a bit so that they're like, this is someone I can talk to. And in many cases, we've adopted these approaches. We're very careful about who speaks to who, and these are private discussions with no guards behind closed doors. And many times they'll go, you're the first person I've ever spoken to about this. And I feel comfortable with you. Not the psychs, not the white coats, not the therapist, not the judge, not the jury, not the lawyers. They're like, you, I understand you. I trust you because you get it. You go, I get it, but we're going to go this way. To get to that point, you have to match and mirror. You know, they are fascinated. Have you killed someone? They are fascinated. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen? Like that, they're fascinated in that. And if you can meet them eye to eye, they go, all right, you get it. Let's talk. And the walls come down. So in order to do something good, you have to play with something dark. And you're playing around the dark arts. And so for people who are unwilling to recognize that they are also inherently bad and that they could use some of that if they could control it, well, then they may be playing around in just this other territory. And when someone with those traits comes into the game who is very smart, very well rehearsed, very well mission focused, you're going to become a stepping stone. And you're also not going to necessarily be able to protect your team. One of the ways I've used it as an analogy in the past is people talk about the wolf or the sheep. What about the sheepdog? Why do we never talk about the sheepdog? It baffles me. The sheepdog has teeth. It has claws. It's fast. It's rat cunning. It eats meat. You know, it's got a lineage of predatory genes built into it. But we've domesticated it. And now it's like an intermediary between the wolf and the sheep. But it's not a sheep. Nor is it a wolf. But if the wolf comes a-knocking, the sheepdog's going to step up and it's going to turn on every one of its dark traits it's got. It's going to bare its teeth. It's going to bite. It's going to claw. It's going to try and outsmart. It's going to try and maim, hurt, trick, deceive in order to protect the sheep. If it's hanging around the sheep, then it's going to potentially adopt a different personality. It's not going to be gnawing and biting at them and hacking at them. It's got it under voluntary control, almost genetic control, because we've bred it that way. But it's neither a sheep nor a wolf. But it is also something to be wary of, and it also works in packs. So there'll be 2 or 3 sheepdogs take out a wolf, and so don't underestimate the value of being able to bare one's teeth. There's an old adage I love, and it goes, "I'd rather be a soldier in a garden than a gardener in a war."
Yeah. It makes sense.
It's like at least the soldier can learn to garden, but if it all goes to crap, the gardener might not have enough time to learn how to soldier. Well, that's that sheepdog analogy, and that's these dark tetrad traits. And it's like having them under voluntary control is a very different discussion to, nah, that's everyone else. Everyone else has a dark tetrad trait except me, or multiple dark tetrad traits except me. I'm different. It's like you're the most prone to of all the people. At least if you acknowledge and you go, look, I'm known to do bad things and I've got voluntary controls put in, that's a different chat.
I said that to someone I spoke to once who is an expert in narcissism. And I said to her, holy crap, I think I might be a narcissist. And she said, because I've done that, things that you've described there. And she said, exactly what you said. We've all got these traits. And if it was consistent, that would be one thing. But she said, I can tell you you're not. And here's how, is because a narcissist would never even A, look at whether they're a narcissist.
Never admit it.
And B, would never admit it. So she said, you're fine. But when you were talking about you would lean towards psychopathy, I would say based on things that I've done over the course of a lifetime that I'm not happy about, but that where I've done things, I just go, you know what? I've done that before, or I've done that before. I don't do it and haven't done a lot of it for a long time. But but the point is it's like until it's explained to you and you see those traits. But what I do think from the conversation that we've had here is that it's almost like there's a level of leadership that works, and that is, if I can coin the term, chameleon leadership. This ability to be what's needed when it's needed. And I think that's probably a bit of a bow tie to summarize.
It fits well with that situational leadership we talked about.
Yeah.
It depends. My answer is almost annoyingly to almost everyone I speak with about these topics is, well, it depends. Yeah. It depends. Yeah. And it gets frustrating, right? Because I remember my dad used to say that to me when I was a kid. And it used to frustrate me. I'm like, give me the answer to the test. Like, what's the answer? It depends. It's annoying. It's an annoying answer, but it is the answer.
Yeah.
And so then you go, well, what is it dependent on? That's a different chat.
Yeah.
And it will lead you to completely different discussions and findings. And it will also teach you a bit about yourself that you can, it's kind of like the tale of two cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. We're both good and bad. But one thing I can say conclusively is that naivete is not going to help anyone in any circumstance. Being naive to these things is not the answer. And bubble wrapping people away from the problem never serves to actually help them. They'll walk into these problems and they'll have no idea what to do. And their frame of understanding of the world will be completely fractured, and their belief system will get shattered in front of themselves, and they'll end up having to go through the 7 stages of grief just to get themselves through it.
Yeah.
Right? But if we can prepare people, we can tune their understanding, teach them how to think, not what to think, you're in pretty powerful territory. You grow some good leaders doing that.
Yeah, I had an athlete once who wanted to or aspired to be like a captain of a team or a leader, and he was always rubbing other people the wrong way. And I actually took him aside and I said, just because someone perceives themselves to be a leader doesn't make them a leader. You need a follower to be able to, without followers, you're not leading anyone. And if you're not finding followers, then it means your approach is not one of leadership. Yeah. It's one of possibly narcissism or something like that you're not perceiving what's needed to actually be a leader. So what advice would you give to someone who aspires? Because there are people who aspire to be a leader. Like, what would you say they needed to do first if that's something they really feel they want to be?
Well, I just make a really key distinction straight out of the gates, and it's a definitional thing because I mentioned it off the cuff before, but it anchors in a John Cotter definition. I think it's a stable one. I think it's a good one. It goes, leaders coordinate change, managers coordinate complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can be coordinating complexity and have a team under your remit, but it's not technically leadership in the influential space.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about change, you're talking about people. When you're talking about management, you're talking a lot about process. When you're talking about management, you're talking about function. When you're talking about leadership, you're talking about form, right? When you're talking about how in management, like how are we going to build this thing? Over in leadership is why are we bothering, or what are we doing here? And then you start to see how these interplay and actually mutually support each other. Because some people go, leaders good, managers bad. Like, thank you, LinkedIn. And they'll have a picture of a manager with a lash. And it's like, that's not the case. It's not a good way to think about this. So for the people who are contemplating opening up Pandora's box and diving into this world of leadership, understand we're talking about people, change, influence. We're talking about reputation, legacy. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Not structure, systems, form, efficiencies. It's a different thing. Okay, so that's important, because pick your path. Some people want that, but they think they're talking about this.
Yeah.
So if they are indeed talking about leadership, well, then it's like, why? Why do you want to be a leader? It kind of sucks a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's very rewarding, and nothing feels better than having done it well and leaving the world in a better state or place than you found it. Like, there's nothing better than that. That is the end game for leadership. But it sucks most of the time. Most of the time, people won't know what you're doing, and so just be word to the wise. Like, if you're going to do it, and it's worth it. But understand it's a big commitment. If you're going to do it, the first step starts with self-awareness, like you identified before. If you don't know who you are, no one else is going to believe what you say. Right? So if you're tricking yourself every day, and I use a couple of measures for this. It's like, if your claim to fame is discipline, but you don't look disciplined, well, you've lost them.
Yeah.
If your claim to fame is visionary, but all you do is deal with 5-meter targets and like the here and now, you're not going to be convincing. If your claim to fame is resilience, and you get emotive every time something goes wrong and throw your toys out of the cot, well, then you're not playing in the world of leadership. In many ways, you have to be the very thing that you proclaim to be. So it starts with creating a foundation of, this is the authentic bit of actually being the thing you say you are. And one of the ways I've had it mentioned to me before, and I kind of liked it, it's like getting caught in the act of excellence. When someone walks in and you're doing push-ups, and they walk in and you're studying or writing a book, and they're like, oh, he actually lives this. He actually is this thing.
Yeah.
It's not a show. If you can get past that and become the thing you want to be, well, then you'll just naturally start attracting people.
Yeah.
They'll gravitate to you. They're magnetized to that.
Someone wants to get in touch with you to work with you, Dave. How can they get in touch with the 8th Mile Consultancy?
Sure. So we have a pretty big following on LinkedIn. That's probably one of our bigger platforms, not surprisingly. That would be, you can reach out privately or through the company on that mechanism, or through the website, www.8thmile.com.au. That'd probably be the best mechanisms, or hit us up on Google via phone, and we'll get you that way.
This is it's only a token. It's a memory.
Oh, thanks
for being on the People with Passion podcast.
Well, that's very
to present
kind.
that to
Thanks,
you.
Craig. Really appreciate it.
But it's just a little pin to say thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.
For offering your advice and everything to the audience of People with a Passion. Really appreciate it.
Really.
Hopefully we'll cross paths again.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Mate.
Cheers.
You too can learn how to be a successful content creator for reach, respect, and revenue. Join me, Craig Rowe, the founder of Applaudable Media, as I help you navigate the journey of creating your very own content. Subscribe to Modern Media Makers on YouTube to give voice to your brand and learn digital content strategies that work for you 24/7.